through temperature. And the resource again is Experiences in Behavior, 1968, by McKellar, M-C-K-E-L-L-A-R. Visual imagery, 97%. Auditory cues, 93%. Motor is 74%. Tactile is 70%. Gustatory is 67%. Olfactory or smell is 66%. Pain is 54%, and temperature is 43%. In addition to sight and sound and smell and taste and touch, all of these physical resources become metaphors when we start using them in our inner world as inner intuitive perceptions. The seventh sense, according to the ancient Egyptians, is the sense of feeling. Feeling the sensations in your body as a cue for energy, as a cue for information of what's going on around you and outside of you. You ever walk into a room and your stomach goes into a knot and you don't know what's going on there, but you find out later that there's been some tension between people? Anybody ever have that kind of experience? That's a clairsentient experience. That's a standard intuitive sense that every single one of us has. Sometimes when we're receiving intuitive impressions, you may get the feeling of a motor movement, like walking or running. That might be a symbol for you to get moving faster or to go forward, for example. Or you may get a smell that reminds you of something. The clairsentient function uses all of the senses to give us insight and information about something in our outer world. And likewise, this is the most important thing, our intuition gives us information about ourselves and our own inner world. The eighth is the experience of a transmission of emotional feeling, not sense feeling, but emotional feeling. That's called telepathy. Telepathy literally translates as the transport of pathy is emotion. Another word for telepathy is called empathy. When you are sitting with somebody and you empathize with them, you can feel what's going on for them. What you might not know is that we also receive telepathic messages from ourselves, from parts of us from the past that maybe are wounded and are calling to us for help, or parts of us that are excited. According to Helmut Schmidt, who I mentioned earlier, he's the physicist who is also a parapsychologist, he has described that really there's no such thing as time and space. And his whole focus was about psychokinesis. So in psychokinesis, you know, bending metal, like Uri Geller, if any of you are familiar with him, or healing, where we do hands-on healing work, what Helmut suggested is that we can do precognition, and the question is, when we're reading the future, are we changing the future through psychokinesis, or are we simply reading what's going on? It's a toss-up. You never know which it really is. But what he said is even more significant, is that while we can heal in the moment and change, have impact on physical reality, we can heal in the future and have impact on physical reality. We can heal in the past and have impact on physical reality. So if you ever have an emotional feeling and you're working with someone and you ask yourself, is this my feeling or is this theirs? Any of you ever have to ask that question? Is this my feeling or is it theirs? First and foremost, explore, have I ever felt this way? Is this a call from a part of myself in the past that is asking for healing? Is this a telepathic communication from a part of me that needs my attention, my love, my care, and my concern? And when that's cleared and healed, I can then be present with you. I can then feel and empathize with you. Any questions on any of that? Clairaudience would be the thought transmission. So transference of thought frequently comes in words. So you would ask yourself, what's the tone? What's the sound? Is it a male sound or female sound? What's the voice? And that can give you much more insight and information into not just the word, but the impression and where it's coming from. Okay?
And that's called what?
Thought transmission, or clairaudience. Clairaudience is the other. So the traditional in parapsychology, it's clairsentience, telepathy, clairaudience, and clairvoyance. But this Egyptian system also includes a few more beyond that: spiritual discrimination, intuition, and self-realization, in addition to the clairs. So after telepathy, which is the eighth sense, we also then move into the transmission of thought, the transmission of intention. Absolutely every one of us has experienced this. The transmission of thought or intention can take many forms. When you're talking with somebody, have you ever had the sense that what they're saying and what they're meaning are not the same thing? That's our ability to read intention. We have the ability to know when what one means and what one says matches or doesn't match. According to the Hindu system, it is the ability to open the throat and read intention or receive guidance or information in the form of words or impressions that are thoughts. That is actually our source of spiritual nourishment. We receive spiritual nourishment from inner resources by receiving the intention of spiritual resources, our guides, our guidance, our loved ones, and our supports, who are always right here with us, and of course, infinite divine resource as well. So that ninth resource is clear seeing. Clear seeing is the ability to perceive image, pictures, dreams, impressions of colors and auras. When you're talking with somebody, you ever have an impression or a picture that flashes through your mind? That's an example of the clear seeing. Or sometimes if you're looking at somebody, they look like an adult, but all of a sudden you see a small child. Clear seeing, you get an impression of the person. Sometimes clairvoyance can be very glitzy, very, there's a lot of kind of Hollywood glamour around being clairvoyant. But it's really not as exaggerated or difficult to really develop that skill. We sometimes expect that it's supposed to look the same as this concrete physical world. But frequently, our inner clear seeing sees symbolically. So if you were, for example, to want to know how to open your clairvoyance, you could ask yourself, what color, if it were a color, what color would it be? If I could imagine a symbol associated with this, what would the symbol be? And then you can open to a clairvoyant impression or image or picture. Intuition is the 10th sense. Intuition is the capacity to do pattern recognition. Pattern recognition. Because our psychic and intuitive resources are really outside of time and space, it is our intuitive function that observes information and data from all of the other senses. The senses of the body, the emotions that are being felt, the thoughts and intentions that are being received, the images and pictures that are coming, the physical environment and what's going on around us. We take all of this and put it together, and suddenly it's as though it's a telescope where we gain a perspective on all of the patterns of how everything has led to this moment right now. And if we keep going in this direction, what's the outcome going to be? Our intuition helps us perceive the karmic pattern. That's the gift of intuition. This can come to us in dreams or impressions or as a flash or an insight, many different ways, or a synchronicity, where suddenly something will happen and a book falls off the shelf, and then all of a sudden it's like that little piece of the puzzle where everything then falls into place and we have a whole new perspective. That's the way intuition works. It puts things together in a way that is meaningful or insightful, even if it's only meaningful or insightful to us. But it adds a sense of value. Not value judgment, but a sense of value. Now, the next intuitive resource, and the 11th sense, according to the Egyptians, is the experience of spiritual discrimination. Spiritual discrimination. And this is a resource that is not talked much about in our current society, and it's one we sorely need to cultivate and develop. Spiritual discrimination is the result of not only intuition, which synthesizes and puts all of the other information together, but now we see or perceive or sense or are guided towards different possible future paths. Which path are you going to choose? Spiritual discrimination suggests we choose the path that brings us into our full realization, into the awakening of our true nature as spiritual beings. Spiritual realization is the 12th sense, according to the ancient Egyptians. Every single one of us has the capacity to awaken to who and what we truly are as spiritual beings. And we use our spiritual discrimination to go in the direction, to do those activities, to accent those experiences that bring us into our health and wholeness, that awaken us to who and what we truly are. When we are observing our guidance, you may get a signal in the form of a body cue. You may get the signal in the form of a wave of emotion. You may get a signal in the form of a thought. You may get a signal in terms of an insight or awareness of a pattern. You may get a signal in terms of an awareness of, fine choosing. These are the options here. And where is it that I, as a spiritual being, as an awakened being, as a creative being, which is the path that allows me to express my creative spirit even more? Now that we know all these amazing resources that we have, how come we're not enlightened beings all the time, right? Well, the thing about living in this physical world, and in many worlds, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual world, is that we have an opportunity to engage in creative process. And creative process is stimulated by contrast. And I remember one of my teachers who was very big on this, Jack Saloma is his name. He would talk about how consciousness loves contrast. That all that exists really when we are here is this experience of polarization and polarity. And there is a non-dual state beyond all of that, but most of the time, contrast. Go for the contrast, go for the gusto. And so what we experience, and the way Jack described it, is that it's the tension between opposites that builds the energy like a charge, that catapults us to a whole new dimension of awareness. Just like we have the positive and negative charge in electricity, or a proton and an electron, that creates a certain amount of tension. That tension builds to such a potential that suddenly it pushes us and moves us beyond. pushes us and moves us beyond. There are three primary ways of understanding what creates barriers to intuition. The first one is the fact that we have animal bodies. We are always being guided by an adrenal response. Whenever there's a change, whenever there's something new, our little adrenal glands will kick in, and we're going to go into a fight, flight, freeze, or faint response. It's natural. It happens without thinking. No big deal. The challenge is we forget to get out of our reaction. So then we start reacting to our reaction and reacting to other people's reactions, and we're off and running and rolling. So the key is, now that you recognize that you have a fear response, how do you respond instead of react? We use our intuition to help us heal instead of react. Now, Freud was brilliant. He developed all kinds of psychological defenses in terms of understanding human response and reaction. All of those are based on our adrenaline response, our fear reaction, whether it's denial or projection or all of those fancy kinds of ways of understanding why we are not why we're defending ourselves in relationship to each other. Remember, I mentioned that intuition comes from the Latin root word tuere, which is to observe, to guard and protect. Through the simple act of observing ourselves, that is the only defense we need. When we observe our own reaction, we can then begin to make a creative choice on how we wish to respond. So, how do we shift from a fear reaction to a creative response? That's a very important element. Instead of going into that little lecturette, I'm going to move right on to something else that I think is really important to understand. We as human beings live in the paradox of being spiritual beings as well as animals that have these fear reactions. As spiritual beings, we recognize that we're all connected. We are all one, even though we're not aware of it most of the time when we're eyes open. And so that leaves us with a dilemma called diffuse boundaries. Diffuse boundaries. I don't know where you begin and where I leave off. This is one of the barriers that can create a real challenge to our intuition. Because what's also true is that while we're all one and we're all connected, what's also true is there might be something going on for you right now that's not going on for me right now. And I need to be able to know that that's what's going on for you. And it's not going on for me, and that's okay. Does that make sense? This is so important, how to be able to distinguish the boundary without being wrong or bad. We get to be different. How do we allow ourselves to be in the face of differences? This is so key, because what frequently happens when we confront the difference is we go into our fear response. And I want you to be like me and me to be like you, and we try to jockey for position then. So the key is how to move beyond that defensive mode in the face of differences. This requires us to have good, healthy, flexible ego boundaries. I know the ego's gotten such a bad rap in the spiritual world, but there's a place for it. Really. We've got one, we might as well make friends with it and find a way to let it do the function it was created to provide for us. And that is about having a sense of self-worth and self-esteem and being able to empower others on their journey as well. So good, healthy, flexible boundaries is the antidote to diffuse boundaries. And until we have those good, healthy, flexible boundaries, we end up having another problem or dilemma that can act as a barrier with our intuition. And that's called ego inflation or ego deflation. Ego inflation is, I am great. In fact, I'm greater than anybody else. And this sense of kind of like being identified with the spiritual aspect is a way of understanding that. Jung would call this possession by the archetype. That's what Jung would call this. And so when we inflate ourselves through arrogance, through needing to be in control, through being the one who wants to direct everything, needing to be right all the time, these can all be barriers to intuition. And it will distort my perspective instead of being able to read the signals clearly. Now, the flip side of the coin of ego inflation is ego deflation. Oh, I don't know anything, poor me, what can I say? That low self-worth, feeling inadequate, doubting ourselves, needing to please others, needing approval from others, needing agreement from others so that we know that we're okay. All of that comes from a low self-worth or self-esteem. So the key to intuition development is to have strong, healthy, flexible ego boundaries that give you a positive sense of self-worth and self-esteem so you can trust yourself. When you trust yourself, you can trust your intuition and trust your signals. And when you can trust your intuition and trust your signals, then you can act on your intuition and integrate it in the world. There are 13 primary impediments to intuition. And so I'm just going to identify those. Fear of loss is one of the primary ones, which is associated with a need to be special. Anybody here ever need to be special? I know we all have this one. That will distort your intuition, because then you might want to please someone, or you're afraid of what's going to happen. Impatience. That's a wonderful barrier to intuition. You want to know, and you want to know now. And again, it's coming from that fear of trying to predict the future. Anybody ever recognize this one? Oh, this is one of my favorites, anxiety. This is the diffuse boundaries. This is when you're picking up everything from everywhere and you don't know what's yours and what belongs to someone else, and you're always kind of in a state of readied anticipation or vigilance. Anybody ever get into that? Maybe not as extreme as I'm describing it, but that can be a barrier to intuition. Anxiety, due to diffuse boundaries, because you're experiencing energy coming from all directions. Trying too hard. Anybody ever get into trying too hard? Trying too hard, needing to prove yourself. Too much effort. And that blocks your ability to see reality as it is. The need to be right, to be in control. Anybody ever fall into self-righteousness? But again, remember, these impediments are about creating tension so we can jump to the next level of our own consciousness. We all have all of these. The need to be right, the need to be in control. Wishful thinking. Anybody ever get into wishful thinking? This can really distort our intuition because we see what we want to see, or we see what we're afraid of seeing. It can be a negative projection or a positive projection. Wishful thinking isn't only positive, it can be negative as well. We talked about that one. Oh, personal biases. Anybody ever approach things by making assumptions first? No, never, of course. Our personal biases and assumptions can really act as barriers to our intuition. They can really act as barriers. Here's another one, regret or remorse. So if you're feeling regret or remorse about something or someone, and you're doubting yourself or the actions, whether you did the right thing, this is the reaction to having been righteous. So now the flip side of being righteous is regret and remorse. That can also distort your intuition and not seeing things clearly. Impatience we've talked about. Feeling unworthy and inadequate, feeling helpless. That can also distort your intuition. If you're feeling unworthy or inadequate, you may not see things clearly because you'll see them through the lens of your own inadequacy. Loneliness or feeling empty is another barrier to intuition. If you are feeling empty or lonely, you may try to fill in with anything just because it's so hard to deal with the existential loneliness. We've already talked about the basic conditioned fear response. The fear response will kill you if you stay in it over and keep reacting from your reaction. So you need to be aware of just the basic animal instinct and to tame your fear. But the fact that you have fear or react, that can act as a barrier to your intuition. Did I talk about need for approval and social conditioning yet? The need for approval and social conditioning can be a very big barrier to intuition. If your culture or your family or your religion or your society says that you can't do certain things or you shouldn't believe certain things, it may distort your capacity to perceive truth just as it is. So breaking through our social conditioning or social convention is another aspect in order to get to truth. And did I talk about disappointment?